Welcome to Cash Plays. And now your host, Bart Hanson.
Hello and welcome to another week of Cash Plays. I am Bart Hanson, the WSOPE, and Howard Lederer. Today's show is going to be a little bit different. As always, you can email me at cashplays@pokerroad.com or send me a Skype over at bart.hanson. A lot of people have said in the past that, Cash Plays is the type of show where you have to be concentrating on it to absorb all the material. If you're doing something else, maybe if you're in the car, as my good buddy Rick Nebbiolo from The Bike would say, if he's cleaning his house and he's listening to the show, he can't really pick up on everything because it's so detailed. Well, this week is a little bit of an experiment. I'm not saying that it was intended to be this way, but I did an interview with Howard Lederer over in Leicester Square at the World Series of Poker Europe. And basically the way that the direction the interview went really wasn't that much about cash game strategy. It's more of kind of a general interview. So it's something that I don't normally do. A little bit with Negreanu over the summer, kind of fell into a general interview. Some strategy is talked about. It's about 40 minutes long, but I think it's very interesting because Howard Lederer, of course, is a predominant, he's a big figure, obviously, in online poker and his relationship with Full Tilt. And, a lot of people on this show play a lot of online poker, so I think it's very interesting. It's a very interesting listen. The first part of it is all about internet legislation and what's going on. So that's why that this week's show is going to be a little bit different. So this is a show that you can casually listen to, and I hope you enjoy it. We'll be back next week with, regular Cash Play shows. I'm going to have David Tuckman on the show. I did get a little snippet with Chris Ferguson that I'll be putting on. We're talking about a little bit about the $1 million cash game, which is kind of, the British version of high-stakes poker and some big hands that went down. Of course, Dave, my former commentator from Live at the Bike, also the lead commentator in the $1 Million Cash Game. And Chris Ferguson played in the $1 Million Cash Game and got involved with several big pots. So without further ado, we're going to take a little break, and we will be back with Howard Lederer right here on Cash Plays.
Cash Plays. Previously on Poker Road Radio.
He's starting to hurry us. And now my partner and I were playing for a lot of money. I think Huck was my partner. We both hit really bad putts to 5 feet away. And I said, "You motherfucker, what are you rushing us for on this fucking putt?" And Yosh just started screaming and yelling. And
I cannot imagine
he took his putter and he threw it as fast as he could. I mean, it was like 7 feet over my head. He clearly wasn't trying to hit me. But I mean, he could have killed me, is what it boils down to, right? so now,
he gave you the whirly bird.
That's true.
He buzzed the tower.
So now he and I started a fist fight right there on the ninth.
What? Wait a minute! I thought your only fist fight ever was with Grizzle.
I think Yosh would kick your ass.
Don't miss a moment. Tune in to Poker Road Radio and get all the action from the tournament circuit. Cash Plays.
Welcome back, everyone, to Cash Plays. I am Bart Hanson here in London with Howard Lederer. How's it going today, Howard?
It's an early exit, so maybe not the best day, but the good news is I get to hop on a plane tomorrow and head home. So
this is actually we're doing this the night of day 1A from the World Series of Poker Europe, and unfortunately for Howard, got knocked out relatively early. I think it was in the first or second level. I think, again, for this show, which is more about cash games, the more interesting story is that you were at the Arsenal match when they just lost at home to Hull. Recording this on Sunday.
Yes.
I think
Hull,
it's the 27th.
the hometown of,
Saturday, the 27th.
of Devilfish.
Really? And you went with
That's where
Roland.
Devilfish is from. And I went with Roland.
Yeah.
Hull apparently was just promoted to the Premier League, and Arsenal's one of the top 3 teams in the Premier League, and they've only lost once going into tonight at home. So this was, Roland told me I probably could have gotten 70-1. betting on a whole win or something, maybe more.
Yeah, it was crazy. I think that they said that it was 20-1, but if you bet 2-1, which was the result, you would have got some sort of crazy.
Yeah,
crazy,
but
crazy
20-1 sounds like, I mean, if Arsenal loses once every 2 or 3 years at home and you're one of the weaker teams in the league, it sounds like the bookmakers had a good bet there, but obviously they're paying out tonight.
Yeah, and I think it's actually great. We have, as Americans, we have no idea in terms of this whole relegation promotion system. We will get to poker, but I find this stuff interesting. Like, you know, no one knows. If you know a lot about baseball, you don't know who's leading in the AAA, but they follow it. You know, Division I here, Division II. If you don't win in the Premiership, you go back down. And
I think that would be a nice punishment. You know, there are some bad teams in the Major League Baseball or the NFL that you know, maybe those owners would spend a little more money and try a little harder if they could actually lose their spot in the in the whole league.
That would be great. The idea of relegation and promotion. I wanted to. We are going to talk some strategy because that's what mainly I do on my show. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of where Full Tilt is now compared to where it was when I first saw it pop up and kind of the history of Full Tilt. Because I think it was either in, I want to say, the World Series of 05 or 06 when we really started to see a Full Tilt presence, and now it's just unbelievable. Can you go through a little bit of the history in the last 10 years?
Well, 10 years, wow.
Or 5 years?
Yeah, it's been about 5 years that the software development and marketing company was formed. That was in the fall of 03. And, the software was developed when it went beta in April of 04. And it's been an amazing ride watching sort of the site develop, and sometimes it's been a rocky ride, and but basically every month it gets bigger, and it's still growing, and I mean now that growth is certainly fueled with just an amazing international enthusiasm for the game, and you just see one country after another take to the game of poker. Probably this year, and you're starting to see it at the World Series. Of course, last year was all about Germany. I think that this year was about France, Russia, Brazil. Those are kind of the next countries to really kind of maybe be the next Germany. But certainly poker is, I think, stronger than ever. And when we get things sorted out here in the U.S., I think that we will see a sort of a new world order where the U.S. is still the biggest country. The best players still, on average, are from the U.S., but where it's truly an international game.
Well, I mean, I'm going to follow up with that question, but a little more on Full Tilt. Full Tilt kind of branded themselves as kind of play where the pros play with the pros. Is that basically the idea? And do you think that you attribute that to the success of the site?
I think actually what we tried to do was brand ourselves as the authentic poker site. Yeah, it's learn, chat, and play with the pros, but it's true poker. We wanted to make sure that if you ever read an email, you weren't going to hear a turn of phrase that any poker player knew was wrong. Mm-hmm. If there was a promotion on the site, it was going to make sense. It wasn't going to be, we've seen promotions on other sites where clearly the person inventing the promotion didn't understand poker, So we always wanted to be true to the game. And I think that people get that when they show up at Full Tilt. They realize that the people that designed the software that mapped out where the buttons are on the screen, how the cards look, how the chips move, they were poker players. And some of the earlier maybe more dominant sites, because they had a leg up in terms of timing, they didn't come from poker only companies, and now the two dominant sites out there are poker only. They're totally committed to poker.
Now, I know that you're a member of the PPA, And I think that sometimes us Americans, we get kind of lost. Even, I've gotten lost, and I stay up with it in terms of where we stand with the UIGEA, right?
Yes, it is UIGEA.
Sometimes I have trouble with that acronym. It's almost like right now it stands where they, it seems like the lobbyists in favor of the poker world are trying to fight its enforcement. Do you see some sort of movement to repeal the law? It's been 2 years.
Well, first of all, if you look, and here now I'm speaking as a board member of the PPA. Mm-hmm. If we look at the UIGA, if you read the UIGA, and I would encourage people to go and read it, and you read the preamble, that opening paragraph, it says that nothing that was illegal is now legal, and nothing that was legal is now illegal. So It didn't change anything. So, you need to look. So it's really what it did was it created a new new law, a new charge essentially that could be levied against someone who was violating the Wire Act. It's built on the Wire Act. It says, look, if you're violating the Wire Act, and now we can go after you for doing an illegal internet gambling transaction, right? For actually the banking of it. Okay. Well, the Wire Act, we know, doesn't apply to poker. So they can talk about illegal internet gambling, but they don't define it in the UIGEA. But it has been essentially defined by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where in the INRI MasterCard case, they ruled that it doesn't apply to poker, and in fact doesn't apply to casino. Maybe that's a bit more iffy, but I think it's not so iffy with poker. So what the PPA has been in Washington doing is saying, hey, yeah, okay, there's this UIGA. It's making it tougher on poker players to get out there and play, but it didn't make playing poker, or the poker only sites at least, and again, there's no issue. There's no lack of clarity in the law where sports are concerned. This is about poker and poker only. It's created a difficult environment while not making it illegal, because it didn't change anything. And poker wasn't illegal before. It's not illegal after the UIGA. So what the PPA initially tried to do was get the Wexler Bill out there. The Wexler Bill is essentially the UIGA clarification, the Skill Games Clarification Act. It just grants poker the same carve-out that some of the other things got from the UIGA. So it's just clarity. Now the banking would become much easier. Maybe there'd be more competition in the marketplace, which would be great for everybody, all the poker players. That certainly hasn't moved forward yet, but I think maybe in the next session it will, particularly if we get an Obama administration. And then you also have the Barney Frank bill. That was more inclusive, and I think more controversial because it included sports, even though there were opt-outs at the state level. But I do think the Barney bill was a brilliant idea in terms of, it says, hey, there will be federal license and federal regulation, but we still we won't take away from the states their right to say yay or nay, activity by activity. So I think Barney's bill without the sports is passable also. And maybe that will be the bill that will pass. I think it's unclear, but I think something. So we have the Barney bill, we have the Wexler bill. They're not quite the same bill, but they're similar. I think we're going to get something introduced in the Senate soon. You never know what the final thing is going to look like, but there's movement in the right direction. And now we had the Barney, the Banking Protection Act, and that deals with something very important. And we have this UIGEA, which is a vague law. The PPA would argue it does not apply to poker, but that doesn't mean that banks aren't worried about it. Mm-hmm. And now you're supposed to put out regulations. And what are regulations? Well, regulations are clarity for those that would be regulated by a new law. That's what regulations are. That's the definition of what regulations are, right? So you have this new law. The new law does not define what illegal internet gambling is. Clearly, there's a difference of opinion out there what illegal internet gambling might be. And it could get very complicated, particularly when you start looking state by state and activity by activity. So what should the regulations do? They should define what illegal internet gambling is and then say, okay, if something is illegal internet gambling, and here is exactly what it is, then this is what you as a bank have to do to stop these transactions, or you're going to be liable to the penalties of the underlying law.
Right.
That's what the regulations should do. Well, the proposed regulations simply said, you'll be liable, here's how you stop the transactions, but we're not going to define anything for you. Well, that was ridiculous. So what Barney's law says, or his bill says, is they are not allowed to propagate these ridiculous regulations if they're going to pull a huge punt here and not define what illegal internet gambling is. So the bill was defeated in committee by a tie. Okay, so a bill needs to actually get a majority to get out of committee. And then about I guess it was about a week or two ago, after about a 2-month wait, they kind of reworked the bill. They added what they called the bright line on sports to Barney's bill. And actually, I think this is something that could get attached to something this year. I think it's something that is passable. Basically, what the bill in its current incarnation says is, okay, we don't have an issue about sports. Sports is clearly illegal internet gambling. So the regulators can issue regulations that are aimed at sports, and they can move forward on other types of illegal internet gambling, but each activity is going to have its day in court, and that court would be before an administrative law judge. So over the course of probably a year or two, each activity, state by state, would get ruled on by an administrative law judge. And eventually we would have very, very clear guidelines and clear regulations on the banking. And I think what would happen is, if not in all 50 states, and quite possibly in all 50 states, internet poker would be declared completely legal, and the banking would become much easier, and everyone would benefit. Maybe there'd be a few states where it would be declared illegal. Who knows? It's unclear. But we would have clarity. And people in states where it's clearly legal to play internet gambling, where it's clearly legal to play internet poker, would be able to do it without getting harassed and having to jump through all the hoops they have to jump through now.
I want to touch on the sports gambling thing in a second, but the thing that I'm confused about, Howard, and I think a lot of the people are confused about, is it's obvious to me that this law was vague. It didn't say that internet poker was illegal. Now, a couple questions about why was it that the major, basically, online company, Party Poker, basically shut themselves down, and those intermediary transactional companies, NetTeller and FirePay, were gone, and nobody, it seems like, everyone says that the law is vague, but no independent companies actually stepped up to fill that intermediate, that transaction void, which seems to be like
first of all, Party Poker was in a tough spot. They were a publicly traded company. Mm-hmm. They had a board that, quite frankly, was just trying to save their own skin. They didn't have a big ownership stake in the company, if any ownership stake at all. Maybe they were in a slightly weaker position due to the fact that they were offered casino as well. Mm-hmm. And they decided to exit. Now, a couple of these other companies, certainly Paradise Poker, their parent company, Sporting Bet, they had been violating the Wire Act all along. Mm-hmm. 888, they were a casino company. So, these publicly traded companies were in a very tough spot. I don't envy them at all. And I think they felt like they had to exit, even though I think in a lot of ways, if you look at the UIGA, by leaving, you were admitting that you were breaking the law before the UIGA was put into place, mm-hmm. right? Because nothing changed.
Right.
If you read the law. So they left. NetTeller was a sports case. That's the problem. They were dead to rights on sports. They had processed billions and billions of dollars, according to their own prospectus when they went public, of sports transactions. So, we'll have to see how things play out. But again, I think with an Obama administration and a Democratic Congress, we're going to get something done the next 2 or 3 years.
I want to switch gears here a little bit and talk about something that, you had obviously played a ton of poker, really before the poker boom. And then you got involved. I want to specifically talk about one event because I have a lot of experience doing live poker. And someone actually had emailed in this question about what you thought your experience, or how did you feel about the experience of doing that live broadcast at Turning Stone a few years ago where Phil Ivey won. A lot of people said that was one of the greatest poker broadcasts that had ever gone down.
I felt, first of all, enormously privileged to be able to do it, It was a lot of fun. And it was actually not the first live poker I'd called. For me, I think the most important poker show in the history of poker was the Isle of Man in 2000. Right at I think it was January of 2000. There was a live show there, and I had the privilege of calling about an hour of that final table. John Duthie ended up winning. But it was the Poker Million. It was live with hole cards, with hole card cams, and there was another. I mean, certainly the fact that I was there and got to call it, not so important. The fact that Mike Sexton was there watching. He wasn't involved in the broadcast, but he watched it, and I think he was blown away. And Mike was a driving force, I think, in not just as a commentator of the WPT, but I think he brought that vision to Lyle, and then got to Lipscomb and everything. Mike was a part of why the WPT happened. Maybe it wasn't his thing necessarily. Maybe it was more Lyle and Steve Lipscomb. But I think Mike Sexton being in the Isle of Man, seeing that show, seeing the potential of live poker, whole card cam poker, I think was the driving force. So I was there back in 2000, and then to be able to do the entire show at Turning Stone, that was a lot of fun. And obviously, I think what was great about that broadcast, not just because it was the first live broadcast in the U.S., the poker was extraordinary. Ivy played so well that session. It was really, really fun to watch.
And of course, it wasn't edited, right? I mean, you basically saw the entire story of everything that went down. Actually, I was looking at your Full Tilt profile, basic stuff on the website. But I found it interesting that it said that it talked about how you were one of the first players to experiment with No Limit Hold'em in New York, and you, again, were among those first players, I guess, at the Mayfair Club. And obviously, No Limit has really come a long way. And I wanted to ask you about the early days of No Limit. I'm assuming that you played it as a cash game, right, in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, we were just learning. I was enormously privileged to be able to play there. I think it was actually kind of a perfect combination for a young, up-and-coming poker pro. I had just started really sort of being able to make a living playing like 10-20.
10-20 limit.
Yeah, 10-20 limit. And then I kind of stumbled onto the Mayfair Club, where there were some weak poker players there because they were inexperienced and were just starting to play. The first, poker was played there with backgammon chips. The Mayfair Club was, for years, sort of the home of some of the world's best backgammon and bridge players. So here I was, a young, just starting to make some money playing poker, had some poker talent, but maybe didn't have a vision or a clear path to becoming a world-class player yet, and may have never done that, except I was at this club where, okay, they weren't great poker players, but they were great games players, and they had accomplished world-class status in their own games, and now they were trying to get good at poker. And just to be able to then take that journey with these same players, right, as we're all trying to get really good at this at this game, but to do it with players that have done it in something else, I'd never done that. So
whether that be chess, backgammon,
right, exactly. And so, you know, that really made a huge impact on my career. And it was fun. It was a different time back then. We would play amongst each other, you know, 2, 3, 4 times a week, you know, for like a whole year, getting ready to come out to the World Series of Poker. That's, you know, you would go to Vegas once, twice a year maybe. And that was it. The rest of the year, you're at your home club making a living. So it's a big deal to come out to Vegas for 2 or 3 weeks and see how you do against, you know, the world's best players. And of course, you know, year after year over, you know, 4 or 5 year period there, you know, the New York group, you know, started winning bracelets and started doing better in the cash games. And we started making an impact. And then, you know, I think the rest is history. You know, out of that one game came, you know, Dan Harrington, Eric Seidel, Steve Zolotow, Jason Lester, Jay Heimowitz, Mickey Appleman. I don't know how many bracelets that all adds up to, but it's like probably over 20.
That's a lot.
You know, and that's one essentially home game. You know, so, but I don't think that that's a coincidence. A lot of these guys had already been very accomplished in other games, so they were good at games in general. And then we were, you know, we were a group. We were kind of a team in terms of our approach to the game, you know, learning from each other and sharing knowledge with each other and lifting the whole group up, theoretically at least, you know, as a team. And then going out to Vegas and sort of proving ourselves. It's you know, it's kind of fun, you know, and that happens now. You know, you see groups of, you know, young internet players. You see, you know, there's the California crew or whatever, you know. I think when you look at most good players, maybe almost all good players, none of them did it on their own, because you can't make you can't make that leap, I think, completely on your own. You need to bounce ideas off of people. You need, you know, enthusiastic friends. And I would encourage all your listeners to not try and just go it alone. Don't just think, oh, well, you're going to play on the internet, you're going to read books, and then go to live tournaments and you're going to set the world on fire. Find a group of friends where you're sharing ideas, challenging each other, and comparing notes, essentially, and I think you're going to find your game getting better a lot quicker.
Now, speaking of bracelets, one of your World Series of Poker bracelets was in a $5,000 Omaha 8 or better, and we talk a lot of strategy on the show, and that's actually the game that I play the most. We talk a lot about Omaha 8 or better. Annie Duke, bracelet holder in Omaha 8 or better, right? Now, did you have a decent amount of experience playing Omaha 8 cash games as well?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the fundamental difference in split pot games between a cash game and a tournament, and a little bit of the general difference in strategy. Do you think it's a more conservative strategy in a tournament? And I know I don't mean to be too broad. But.
Yeah, I think that's a little too broad. I think that Omaha 8 or better tournaments are an interesting opportunity when you find the right table. You can actually open up your game. You can take those pots away, just ripping high, you know, kind of when the low's not getting there. You can kind of run over a table that way. That kind of stuff, you know, just kind of loosening up to just take the high half when it's available, that doesn't work in cash games the same way it can in a tournament. So I would say no, actually. You know, I think in some ways cash games you need to play tighter.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, that's my own approach to the game.
Absolutely.
I think you're supposed to start with a good hand.
Yeah.
And getting out there, you know, I'm just not a big fan of, you know, the ace 4-5 kind of stuff, you know, just trying to turn that into a hand. But in the right spot in a tournament, if you've got a nice high feature going with it, and when the flop comes Jack 8, you're going to get a pickup there, even though you completely whiffed, because you're up against the right people. I think that plays better in a tournament, actually.
And driving maybe high hands and stud high low as well.
Well, high hands and stud high low. I mean, God, they're just, again, you really have to pick your spots. I mean, there's just nothing uglier than trying to just bring home a pair of queens and a 3-way pot, and stud 8 or better. Yeah, I mean, heads up.
Yeah.
Okay, that's another story. But, again, you have to pick your spots, and you need to really be very prepared to even just start folding on 4th Street, when you're in a 3-way pot, and maybe just both guys hit a good low card. Just who needs that spot?
I had emailed Barry Greenstein. He's over here as well, just asking him about you, just to give me a couple questions and stuff, and some of the background. And one of the things he said that he thought that your best game was limit hold'em. You won the $5,000, I think it was the Party Poker Million Cruise, where it was limit hold'em. Limit, it's weird. Again, I know you don't play that much anymore, but it seems, limit was huge before the poker boom, and now it's kind of died off. What do you think about that in terms of the transformation of the game?
I think died off is I think news of limit's death is a bit premature there, or actually a bit exaggerated. You can just look on Full Tilt. More and more big horse action there. I think over time, poker tends toward limit. Limit's a little more action. The weaker player has a bit more of a chance, at least night in and night out. But at the same time, it's an extraordinarily tough, interesting game for tough players, good professional players to play against each other. I think, day in and day out, a tough limit game is an incredible challenge for a good player. Because it's all about just bets. Just that tough, just not giving away a thing. And day in and day out, when you're in a tough game, that's a big challenge in limit poker. Whereas the no limit, okay, let's look at, weak players just getting carved up.
Absolutely.
They just have no chance, right? And when you have really good players, what kind of happens is, you end up having these kind of big flips almost.
Right.
And it's just then it just turns into a huge gamble.
That's kind of what's happened even at the higher stakes.
Yeah.
If you take a look at some of the higher stakes games, that those no limit games have almost died off now.
Yeah. So I think we're going to see limit really be the game of choice in the high games. And I think we'll see more and more limit games just in general at all levels.
Now, what do you think about PLO? Now over in the States, as that's gained a little bit of popularity?
Yes, again, people, that's the transition. It's like no limit hold'em to PLO, which now at least gives the weaker player a bit of a better chance. It's a higher volatility game. But again, I think the overall trend will be toward limit. And again, the horse game it's just great variety. You need such a wide range of skills, and you're never just, oh God, this is my 100th hand in a row of one game. You're just always changing games and changing gears, and part of poker, I think, is you can be a top player, and you're sitting down in like an 8-9 handed game, and there's a seat or two open, and someone comes to the table, and they could even say, oh, well, I can't beat Patrick Antonius, but I'm better than these other guys, right? So very much poker is a game where the reason there's action is because people can talk themselves into why they can win, right? Well, horse, it's like, oh, well, even you sit down with Patrick Antonius, someone is going to be able to convince themselves, oh, but I'm better than Patrick at this game or that game, right? So because there's a variety of games, I think people can talk themselves into feeling like they have an edge a little easier than one game.
Patrick Antonius, one of the newest members of Team Full Tilt, right?
Yep.
From over the summer. It's also interesting too that a lot of those. We had a guy on here from Deuces Cracked. His name's Joe Tall, and he talked about how he loves to play those big horse games because it's tough for those guys, like a guy like Durr, who's playing a table of no limit, a table of PLO, and a table of horse, to pick up in the stud rounds with the up cards and multi-tabling stud. So I think it's great that everything is coming, definitely coming back, to limit hold'em. one other thing, again, we talk about mostly cash games on this show, but I wanted to ask you because I know that most of the time now you're playing in tournaments, however many that you play in. But, now it seems like the nature of these players in tournaments, the younger kids, the online kids, okay, they're playing 1,000 tournaments a week online. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that their strategy is that even in a deep stack tournament, in the first or second level, they will take a 52-48 edge for their entire tournament life because they're used to, say, the volume of it. And I wanted to ask you, in a field that's maybe extremely weak, like, say, a World Series of Poker main event, do you think that, does that make up for the fact that it might be fundamentally correct to always take that edge just because they're
not
weaker?
Fundamentally correct. It's just simply a mistake. If you have a big enough advantage over your table, you're not supposed to take that flip. Mm-hmm. Clearly, if you're constantly folding, 55, 45 flips, then you're not a favorite, right? So It's kind of a catch-22. But that's not what you're presented with in, like, a main event. You are presented with a couple of those spots where you can avoid that flip. And you're presented with a lot of really weak players that you can just get it in as a 4-1 favorite. If you're just patient enough. And I think, online and you're playing tons of tournaments, great idea. But when you're talking about your once-a-year shot in the main event, which doesn't mean that you should be playing weak. Mm-hmm. Oh, no, I don't want to go broke. Look, we all have to be prepared to go broke. There are 8,000 people in the tournament. 7,999 of them are going, right? So you don't want to play weak, but the field is so soft. You are not supposed to take those flips. I think a guy like Phil Hellmuth overdoes it. He'll take, he'll fold 60. He's like 2-1 favorite and he's folding because he feels like he's a 20-1 favorite to double up. Well, okay, nice. But he's told me stuff like that. Yeah. But you are supposed to avoid flips in those situations, and that's just the nature of tournament poker. You can read Skolansky's book on, his tournament poker book, and he kind of explains the math there, and that math is real, and you shouldn't ignore it just because you're some internet guy that likes to play lots of tournaments when you're playing in a really special, soft live tournament. So
I'll give an example because some internet. My buddy talked about some internet guy giving this example. You raise up with 2 queens and somebody moves over the top of you with ace king and they accidentally flip their hand up and they have ace king, and it's the first level of the World Series of Poker and your table's pretty soft. That might be a spot that you pass on, right? And that becomes 57-43 if it's offsuit.
Yeah, that's 57. If that's a real 57, that gets tough to lay down. Right. There's a big difference between 57 and 52. Right. That's a big difference.
Right.
So nines against ace king suited, that's like 52, right?
Right.
Queens, against ace king offsuit, and the suits are right. Now we're talking, it gets hard to fold.
One last thing before we wrap things up, and again, I really appreciate your time. We talk a lot about poker psychology on the show, not just strategy. And, one of the things that you are known for is your even keelness and just your overall, straight composure at the table. I've talked with Barry about this a lot too. Now, when you're playing against similarly skilled opponents, it seems like most of the money that's won and lost is through steaming. So how did you basically, go about, being so mentally stable at the table? Was it just something that was developed? Is there some way that somebody can improve upon that?
I think I developed it out of necessity. Look, I think I'm a very good poker player, but when, I took on the biggest cash games in the world, I think I had to admit to myself that my A-plus game wasn't as good as the A-plus game of most of the people I was playing with. I felt like. So how am I going to beat these guys? I'm going to beat these guys by making sure that my B game is a hell of a lot better than their D game. Mm-hmm. And making sure that I never bring my D game to the table.
Right.
And, that's something, and in terms of in terms of a role model there, it was Chip Reeves. That was a guy that he probably never took worse than his B+ game to the table. Boy, it'd be nice to have stop ringing.
That's okay. These are very directional mics, so
good.
It's okay.
But he was just so tough, just so mentally tough. There was just no one. I mean, he could just be stuck and buried and just playing really well, like really annoyingly well,
right?
For a guy, and I just felt like I had to bring that to the table. I mean, there are other guys that are just so talented that they can steam here or there, and they still win. And they get a little something for the steaming because people remember the steaming episodes,
right.
Whatever. Okay, that's just not my mentality. I just can't deal with it. Right. So I don't do it.
Well, Howard, I appreciate taking the time, and that is going to wrap things up here on Cash Plays. I will be with you next week, possibly from Los Angeles. So, again, Howard, I appreciate you coming on the show, and
I appreciate it.
Good luck with. Everyone off. I'm sure is saying good luck with the PPA and all your efforts and making online poker, I guess, easier to play here in this country.
Get out there and vote for Obama. Get out there and volunteer for Obama. I think I'm heading back to Las Vegas, and my wife's already volunteered. I think I'm gonna get out there, maybe knock on a few doors.
So you really, actually, we didn't go too in depth in this, but you think that the Obama administration is better for poker than the McCain administration?
By a mile.
By a mile. Okay.
And the reason is because, first of all, Obama's a poker player. Mm-hmm. McCain's a craps player. So just think about that right there, okay?
Yeah.
That's why we're voting for Obama, for starters. But we have a situation where I don't think online poker, online gambling is an important issue to either of them. So at the end of the day, what one guy or the other will when you're a politician, you only have so many issues that you're willing to expend political capital and energy on. And when an issue doesn't come under one of your key core issues, what you end up doing is kind of doing what the party line is. Well, the party line, there is an anti-internet gambling plank in the Republican platform, and there isn't one in the Democratic platform. So I'm not suggesting that Obama's going to be out there fighting for us, but he's not going to get in our way. And McCain will, not because McCain cares, but because his party cares. Republicans, the Republican Party, because they pander to the agents of intolerance and, the religious right within their party. That's just part of their coalition. They will always be a problem for us. And that doesn't say that there aren't some moderate Republicans, guys like Peter King,
right?
Guys like Pete Sessions, but those guys are fighting against, they are moderate Republicans, but they're not mainstream in their own party on this issue. And, they've taken on our issue, and I give them all the respect in the world, but they are, they are the exception to the rule in the Republican Party, and I would expect McCain to be the rule in his party. So it's going to be easy for him to veto a pro-online poker bill just to score a few points with his base.
And it just drives me nuts because I thought the Republicans back in the day were supposed to be the party of less government. So this would actually be a Republican issue where they would be in favor of
this should be,
right.
But the Republicans have allowed themselves to be completely corrupted
by the religious right.
right.
And I used to call myself a Republican back in the day, and I don't now exactly for that reason.
Well, I think at some point maybe they'll realize that religious intolerance, this social conservatism, which is, I don't even know what that means, is not going to be something that will help their party. And I would like, the religious right used to be a sleepy political group. They weren't a big deal in U.S. politics, and somehow they got a voice. I think it dates back to about 1980. I think it dates back to Reagan really put together that coalition. The religious right used to just sort of be. They used to mostly vote Democrat, and they weren't given a lot of power within the Democratic Party. And Reagan kind of invited them in and gave them a lot of power and activated them as a political group. And I'd like to see them all go off the pasture.
Yes, me too.
So,
That's going to wrap things up again. Thank you very much, Howard.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And we will see you guys next week right here on Passion Radio.